Marcus stood at the pinnacle of his glory during the company's 5th anniversary gala, holding a crystal flute like a scepter, amidst the adoring crowd at the Plaza. He announced that I was merely dead weight clinging to his tailored tuxedo. He claimed he could discard me whenever he pleased. I took a slow sip of my wine. He believes I am a fragile decoration, completely unaware that I hold the kill switch to the empire he so proudly calls his own. My name is Elena Vance, and at 32 years old, I had mastered the art of becoming invisible. The air inside the grand ballroom of the Plaza smelled of stale ambition and expensive perfume, a suffocating blend that usually made my head spin. Tonight, however, I stood perfectly still in the shadow of a massive marble pillar, clutching a glass of sparkling water I had no intention of drinking. From my vantage point, the swirl of New York's technology and finance elite looked like a tank of sharks draped in silk and velvet. They were all circling one man. Marcus Vance stood in the center of the room, bathing in the golden light of the chandeliers. He looked every inch the modern King Midas of the tech world. The founder of NovaStream wore his bespoke tuxedo like armor, his laughter booming loud enough to rattle the crystal glasses on nearby trays. To the world, he was the visionary genius who had revolutionized data streaming, the man who turned zeros and ones into billions of dollars. To me, he was the man who had conveniently forgotten where the code actually came from. I took a sip of my water, my eyes tracing the sharp line of his jaw. 5 years ago, that jaw had been covered in stubble as we sat on the cold concrete floor of a rented garage in San Jose. Back then, my fingers were the ones bleeding over the keyboards, writing the complex algorithms that formed the backbone of his empire while he slept on a pile of laundry in the corner. Marcus was just the face, the voice, the pitchman. Now, as I stood alone in my beige designer dress, I was nothing more than a mobile decoration, a silent accessory to his loudness. I was the trophy wife with no trophy to show for my labor. A flash of red silk caught my eye. Serafina, the newly appointed marketing director, slithered through the crowd to stand beside him. She was 24, vibrant, and looked at my husband with a hunger that had nothing to do with corporate ambition. She placed a manicured hand on his forearm, leaning in close enough that her hair brushed his cheek. It was a public display of ownership right in front of my face, and Marcus did not pull away. He leaned into it. Marcus was already on his 4th scotch. I could see the glaze in his eyes, the looseness in his gestures that always signaled trouble. He was holding court with a group of potential angel investors, his voice carrying over the low hum of conversation. "You have to know when to cut the dead wood," Marcus declared, gesturing wildly with his glass, sloshing amber liquid onto the floor. "In business and in life. If something stops working, you replace it. Simple as that." I cycled through developers like I cycle through suits. I stepped forward, emerging from the shadows. I knew that tone. It was the prelude to a disaster. I reached his side and spoke softly, keeping my voice low so only he could hear. "Marcus, maybe switch to water. We have the morning interview tomorrow." He spun around, the sudden movement causing him to stumble slightly. The room went quiet. He looked at me with pure disdain, his lip curling up in a sneer that twisted his handsome face into something ugly. Don't you dare tell me what to do," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. "I am just looking out for you," I said calmly. He laughed, a harsh barking sound that drew every eye in the room. "Looking out for me? You are nothing but a weight around my neck. Elena, I made you. I bought you these clothes. I put that roof over your head." Serafina giggled, covering her mouth with her hand, her eyes dancing with malicious delight. Marcus turned back to the investors, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Look at her. She thinks she has power. I can dump you anytime I want you. You aren't worth a damn thing without me." The silence that followed was absolute. I felt the weight of 300 pairs of eyes pressing against my skin. I saw the smirks on the faces of the rival CEOs. I saw the pity in the eyes of the wives who had been traded in for younger models years ago. They expected tears. They expected me to run out crying, humiliated and broken, playing the part of the discarded woman to perfection. Instead, a cold calmness washed over me. It settled in my chest, freezing the last remnants of the love I had once held for him. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a small, insecure man drowning in his own ego. I let out a short, dry laugh. It echoed in the silent ballroom. Really, I asked, my voice steady as steel. The single word hung in the air. Marcus blinked, his mouth opening slightly, confused by the lack of fear in my eyes. For a split second, the arrogance faltered. I did not wait for an answer. I placed my full glass on the waiter's tray passing by. I turned my back on the king of Nova Stream, on Serafina, and on the life I had built from the ground up. As I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the marble floor, I knew one thing for certain. The mourning period was over. The demolition was about to begin. I returned to the penthouse, the silence of the empty apartment greeting me like an old friend. Most women in my position would have collapsed onto the velvet sofa, sobbing into a cushion while mascara ran down their cheeks. I did not shed a single tear. I walked straight past the master bedroom, ignoring the scent of Marcus's cologne that still lingered in the air, and entered his home office, or rather, the room he thought was his home office. I locked the heavy oak door behind me and moved the large abstract painting on the north wall. Behind it lay a titanium safe. I placed my palm on the scanner, and with a soft mechanical whir, the heavy steel door swung open. Inside, there were no diamond necklaces or stacks of cash. Instead, there was a high-powered server rack and a single, secure laptop. To the world, I was Elena Vance, the unemployed housewife living off her husband's genius. But inside the encrypted networks of the global finance world, I was known only as the broker. I was the shadow strategist for Olympus Venture Capital, the massive parent company that funded half the tech startups in Silicon Valley, including Nova Stream. I sat down and booted up the system, the blue light of the screen reflecting in my eyes. My mind drifted back to 5 years ago. We were sitting on the floor of our first apartment, eating cheap noodles. Marcus had been terrified of public speaking, terrified of failure. I can't face them. Elena, he had stammered back then, his hands shaking. I'm a fraud. You wrote the code. It's yours. We made a deal. Marcus, I had told him gently, I want the quiet. I want to build. You want the stage. You take the credit. And I will make sure the engine never stops running. It was a symbiotic pact. I craved anonymity to work for Olympus without conflict of interest. He craved adulation. But fame is a potent drug. Over the last 60 months, Marcus had rewritten history in his own mind. The gratitude had faded, replaced by a delusional arrogance. He actually believed he was the genius now. He believed I was the parasite. I typed in a command string, bypassing the rudimentary security of our joint bank accounts. The numbers on the screen confirmed what my gut had already told me. You idiot, I whispered to the empty room. Marcus had been sloppy. In the last 6 months alone, he had funneled over $3 million into shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. All the trails led to accounts connected to Serafina. He was draining our liquid assets, preparing to leave me with nothing but the dust settling in an empty bank account. I pulled up the file for Project Ether. This was the crown jewel. The revolutionary artificial intelligence platform NovaStream was set to launch in 2 weeks. Marcus had spent the last year giving interviews about his sleepless nights spent coding the neural network. The truth was, while he was spending his nights in hotel rooms with Serafina, I was the one sitting at this very desk, writing the 80,000 lines of code that made Ether breathe. He did not even know the administrative password to his own flagship product. My burner phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from my private investigator. I opened the attachment. It was a photo of a property deed for a beachfront villa in Malibu, purchased yesterday. Along with it came a draft of a legal filing. Marcus wasn't just planning to leave me, he was planning to destroy me. The legal strategy outlined in the stolen email was brutal. He intended to file for divorce on grounds of my alleged mental instability and infidelity. He was going to gaslight me, claiming I was the cheater, to void the prenuptial agreement and cut me out completely. I stared at the screen. I expected rage. I expected my hands to shake. But all I felt was a strange, hollow relief. The last tether of guilt I had felt about destroying the man I once loved snapped. He had not just broken my heart. He had tried to break my mind and my future. I picked up the secure line and dialed a number that only 3 people in the world possessed. It rang once before a deep voice answered. "This is an unsecured time. Broker? Is it urgent?" "It is," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I am initiating a code black on the Nova Stream portfolio. I need to speak with the head of legal at Olympus. Elena." "Are you sure?" The voice on the other end hesitated. "A rare break in protocol. If we pull the plug now, it will be a bloodbath. That is the point," I replied, staring at the face of my husband smiling from a framed photo on the desk. "Prepare the paperwork for an immediate investment recall. He violated the morality clause. I want the papers served within 24 hours. Understood." "We move on your command." I hung up the phone. Marcus thought he was playing a game of chess, but he didn't realize he was playing against the person who designed the board. I wasn't just going to win. I was going to make sure he never played again. The morning sun slashed through the blinds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, but the atmosphere in the living room was colder than a morgue. Marcus walked in, still wearing his tuxedo shirt from the night before, unbuttoned and wrinkled. He did not look at me. He simply tossed a thick manila envelope onto the marble coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. "Sign them," Marcus said, his voice scratchy from alcohol and lack of sleep. "I want you out of here in 24 hours. I picked up the documents. Divorce papers. He had been planning this for weeks. The terms were draconian. I would get nothing but the clothes on my back. I uncapped a pen and signed the last page without hesitation. Marcus blinked, his brows furrowing in confusion. You aren't going to fight. No begging, I know when an investment has failed," I said, placing the pen down. "I will leave. But 24 hours is impossible to pack 5 years of a life. Give me 3 days." He sneered, pouring himself a glass of water. "Fine. 3 days. It is not like you have anywhere to go anyway. Just stay out of my sight." I walked out the front door 20 minutes later, but I did not go to a hotel. I took a cab to the generic glass skyscraper directly across the street from Nova Stream headquarters. I took the private elevator to the 42nd floor, bypassed the receptionist, and walked into a conference room where 4 people in expensive suits were waiting for me. "Good morning." "Broker," the lead attorney said, standing up. "Let us get to work," I replied, taking the seat at the head of the table. "Pull up the Nova Stream capitalization table." On the giant screen, a pie chart appeared. To the public, Marcus Vance owned 51% of the company, giving him controlling interest. He thinks he is untouchable because of that majority stake, I said, pointing at the screen. But look at the leverage. To fund the expansion last year, he used his equity as collateral. Correct. The financial analyst nodded. He pledged 40% of his personal shares to Olympus Venture Capital to secure the Series B funding. I opened the loan agreement on my tablet. It was a document I had drafted myself under the Olympus banner, a document Marcus had signed with a flourish. Too busy drinking champagne to read the fine print. "Highlight Clause 14B and Clause 19, I ordered." The text zoomed in. Clause 14B, the morality clause. Clause 19, Intellectual property integrity. If the CEO engages in conduct that damages the company reputation, or if the company loses ownership of its core intellectual property, I recited from memory, the loan is immediately in default, and Olympus has the right to seize the collateral shares instantly. I opened my laptop and connected to the secure Wi-Fi. It was time to verify the breach. I didn't need a password. When I built the NovaStream architecture, I left a back door, a hidden root access that bypassed all security protocols, designed for emergency maintenance. Marcus had never bothered to audit the code. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Terminal windows popped open, scrolling green text against a black background. I bypassed the firewall and accessed the internal financial logs. Got him, I whispered. The records were messy, covered up with amateur accounting tricks. He has siphoned off nearly $10 million in the last 18 months, I told the team, projecting the ledger onto the main screen. Look at these transfers. Consulting fees to a shell company in Panama, expenses for private jets, jewelry purchases listed as office supplies. He is using company funds to fund his affair with Serafina. That alone was enough to send him to prison for embezzlement. But I found something worse in his private email draft folder. There was an email chain with the CEO of Cyberdyne, our biggest competitor. Marcus was arranging a private meeting. He attached a zipped folder containing a sample of the source code for Project Ether. He is selling the engine, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous low. He knows the divorce will freeze his assets, so he is trying to sell the source code for cash before the court steps in. He is going to gut the company and leave the investors with a hollow shell. The attorney looked at me, his face pale. If he sells that code, NovaStream is worthless. We need to freeze him now. No, I said, closing my laptop with a snap. If we freeze him now, he might wiggle out with a settlement. I do not just want the money back. I want to burn his reputation to the ground. He wants to sell my work. I will make sure he has nothing to sell. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the NovaStream building across the street. I could see Marcus in his office, pacing back and forth, probably on the phone with his buyer. Prepare the recall notice, I commanded. But do not serve it yet. We wait for the shareholder meeting. I want him to feel safe until the very last second. The live stream on my laptop screen showed Marcus standing on a stage that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Behind him, the logo for Project Ether pulsed in a rhythmic blue light. He looked directly into the camera, his smile practiced and dazzling. Innovation is a lonely road, Marcus said to the cheering crowd, but I was lucky to find a muse who understands the language of the future. Ladies and gentlemen, the co-creator of Ether, Serafina Cross. I took a sip of my herbal tea and calmly wrote down the timestamp of the lie in my leather notebook. 10:14 a.m. False claim of authorship. Defamation of character. On the screen. Serafina walked out, waving to the audience like a beauty queen. She had never written a line of code in her life. She thought Python was just a type of snakeskin for her boots. 2 hours later, the front door of the penthouse burst open. Marcus walked in, his arm draped possessively around Serafina's waist. They were laughing, high on the adrenaline of the press conference and the champagne they had undoubtedly consumed in the limo. "Oh, you are still here," Serafina said, looking at me as if I were a stain on the carpet. She turned to Marcus, pouting. "Baby, this whole room needs to be gutted. The energy is so stagnant. I want everything in white and gold. Whatever you want, darling," Marcus replied, loosening his tie. "Measure whatever you like. She will be gone soon." I sat in the armchair, closing my book. Serafina sashayed over to me, looking down with a smirk that was meant to be pitying. "You know," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, "I almost feel bad for you. It takes a special kind of woman to stand beside a visionary like Marcus. You became obsolete. A man like him needs inspiration, not a housekeeper." I looked at her calmly. "Inspiration is fascinating. Tell me," Serafina, since you are the co-creator, how did you solve the latency issue in the neural bridge algorithm? Did you use a recursive loop or a linear stack? Serafina blinked. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at Marcus, panic flickering in her eyes. Well, we decided that. She does not need to answer your technical quizzes, Marcus snapped, stepping between us. She focuses on the vision. I handle the mechanics. Stop trying to embarrass her. I was just curious, I said softly. It is a very basic question for a co-creator. Marcus's face turned red. You are pushing your luck. Elena, one more word and I cancel your credit cards right now. I will freeze the joint account before the banks close. You will be on the street with $0 in your pocket. This was the moment. I needed him to feel powerful. I needed him to believe I was helpless so he would not look at the server logs. I shrank back into the chair, letting my voice tremble. No, Marcus, please. I have no cash. Please don't cut me off. I just need a little more time to pack. He laughed, the tension leaving his shoulders. He enjoyed seeing me beg. That is better. Keep your mouth shut and get out of our way. They spent the rest of the evening drinking wine and planning their new life in Malibu, completely ignoring me. I went to the guest room and waited. At 2 a.m, the penthouse was finally quiet. Marcus had passed out on the sofa, and Serafina was asleep in the master bedroom. I opened my laptop one last time. I logged into the central repository of Nova Stream. The copyright for the core code of Project Ether was not registered to Nova Stream, nor to Marcus Vance. Years ago, I had embedded a digital watermark in the foundation of the system, registering the intellectual property under the name Eleanor Vancroft, my grandmother's maiden name. I executed a command transfer of rights, revoke license, deep inside the company servers. The digital locks slammed shut. The code was no longer theirs to use. A small error message popped up on the dashboard, a simple yellow warning light. Marcus, had he been awake and sober, might have noticed it, but he was asleep, dreaming of billions he would never see. I closed the laptop and picked up my small suitcase. I walked to the dining table and placed my platinum wedding band on the polished wood. Beside it, I left a sealed white envelope. Inside was not a letter, but a single index card with a sequence of numbers, the coordinates to the grave of the career he had just murdered. I walked out into the cool night air of New York City. I did not look back. The collapse of Marcus Vance's empire did not happen with a bang, but with the soft vibration of a smartphone on a mahogany desk. 3 days after I walked out of the penthouse, Marcus sat in his office, likely nursing a hangover and congratulating himself on getting rid of me. Then, the notification arrived. It was an alert from his private wealth management firm. His assets had been frozen due to suspicious activity and potential fraud. I was not there to see it, but I knew exactly what he did next. He picked up his phone and dialed my old number, his face likely turning a dangerous shade of purple. He assumed I had called the IRS out of spite. He probably prepared a string of insults, ready to scream them into the receiver. You petty little. He would have started, but he never got the chance. The automated voice informed him that the number was no longer in service. I had severed the line. The confusion turned to panic an hour later. The glass doors of his office burst open, and his lead engineer, a man named David who usually had ice water in his veins, stumbled in. He was pale, clutching a tablet as if it were a bomb. Marcus, you need to see this, David stammered, his voice cracking. The system, it is locked out. Marcus laughed, a nervous, dismissive sound. Just reboot the server. David, why are you bothering me with this no? Marcus, you do not understand, David insisted, thrusting the tablet into his face. It is not a bug. It is a kill switch. The source code for Project Ether. It is gone. The repository is displaying a legal notice on the screen in bold red letters. The message read, "Access denied. Copyright infringement. Property of Nemesis Holdings." "What the hell is Nemesis Holdings?" Marcus roared, slamming his fist on the desk. "Get legal on the phone, now." But the legal team was already swamped. At that exact moment, the internet was exploding. I had leaked a dossier to 3 major tech tabloids at dawn. The headlines were brutal. They exposed Serafina not as a prodigy, but as a fraud who had faked her degree from Wharton and had a documented history as a high-end escort before Marcus hired her. The anonymous source provided photos, emails, and transcripts. Inside the office, Serafina was sobbing in the bathroom, refusing to come out as her social media notifications turned into a tsunami of hate. By noon, the investors began to panic. The news of the copyright lockout and the CEO's scandal merged into a perfect storm. The phones at NovaStream rang off the hook as venture capitalists demanded answers. Marcus tried to hold the line, but then the courier arrived. It was a formal notice from Olympus Venture Capital. "We are calling in the loan," the letter stated. "Due to material breach of the morality clause and loss of intellectual property assets. The principal sum of $50 million is due immediately." $50 million. Marcus didn't have it. He had spent it on jets, parties, and Serafina. Desperation took over. He logged into his brokerage account, his fingers trembling as he tried to execute a sell order for his personal NovaStream stock. He needed cash. Any cash, to pay off the sharks. He entered the trade to dump $10 million worth of shares. Transaction rejected. A pop-up window appeared. Account flagged by Securities and Exchange Commission. Investigation pending. I had sent the SEC the logs of his insider trading and embezzlement 48 hours ago. He was trapped in a burning building with no exits. Marcus ran out of the building, ignoring the shouting reporters gathered in the lobby. He drove his sports car like a maniac to my parents' house in New Jersey, convinced I was hiding there, convinced he could force me to fix this. He pounded on their door until my mother answered. She looked at him with confusion. She told him the truth: she had not seen me, and she had no idea where I was. For the first time, Marcus realized that the woman he had lived with for 5 years was a stranger. He drove back to the city in a daze. His phone pinged one last time. It was an email from an encrypted address. There was no text, just a single link. He clicked it. It was a calendar invite. Emergency shareholder meeting. Location: NovaStream boardroom. Time tomorrow. 8 o'clock in the morning. He stared at the screen, the rain hammering against the roof of his car, realizing that the executioner's axe was about to fall, and he didn't even know who was holding the handle. The air inside the glass-walled boardroom on the top floor of the NovaStream tower was so thin it felt difficult to breathe. 12 of the most powerful investors in the technology sector sat around the long obsidian table, their faces grim, their fingers tapping impatiently on leather folios. They were sharks smelling blood in the water. The double doors swung open and Marcus walked in. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in a single night. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin gray, and his usually immaculate suit was rumpled. Serafina trailed behind him, wearing oversized sunglasses to hide her swollen eyes, clutching a designer bag that she had likely bought with embezzled company funds. Marcus cleared his throat, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Ladies and gentlemen, please." "Everyone calm down," Marcus said, his voice trembling slightly. "The copyright alert is just a technical glitch, a disgruntled ex-employee trying to scare us. We will have the system back online in 2 hours. It is not a glitch." "Mr. Vance," a deep voice boomed from the end of the table. "And we are not waiting 2 hours. The representative from Olympus Venture Capital is here to discuss the immediate recall of our loan." Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead. "Fine. Send him in. I can explain everything to him." "Her," the voice corrected. The side door opened. I stepped into the room. I was not wearing the beige cardigans Marcus preferred. I wore a sharp, tailored black suit that cost more than his car. My hair was pulled back in a severe, professional bun. I wore dark sunglasses that concealed my eyes. The sound of my stilettos clicking against the floor was the only sound in the room as I walked to the head of the table. I removed my sunglasses and looked directly at him. Marcus froze. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. Beside him, Serafina gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she recognized the useless housewife she had mocked just days ago. Elena, Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. "What? What are you doing here? This is a closed meeting. I am not here as your wife." "Marcus," I said, my voice cold and precise. "I am here as the senior strategic advisor for Olympus Venture Capital. And more importantly, I am the sole proprietor of Nemesis Holdings, the legal owner of the intellectual property you are currently stealing." I did not wait for his reaction. I plugged my laptop into the main console. The giant screen behind me lit up. "Let us look at the facts," I announced to the room. I clicked a button. A series of bank transfers appeared on the screen. In the last 18 months, the CEO has diverted $10 million of company capital into personal accounts. I explained, using a laser pointer to highlight the transactions. He labeled them as consulting fees. In reality, they purchased a villa in Malibu, a Porsche, and covered the living expenses of Ms. Cross, the investors murmured, shooting angry glances at Marcus. That is a lie," Marcus stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. She is crazy. She is just a bitter ex." And the product one of the board members asked, ignoring him. "What about Project Ether?" "Marcus Vance never wrote a single line of code for Project Ether," I stated calmly. I pulled up the development logs. These are the timestamps of the commit logs. As you can see, 90% of the core architecture was written between midnight and 4 in the morning, times when Mr. Vance was documented to be at nightclubs or hotels with Miss Cross. I projected a digital certificate on the screen. Every block of code contains a cryptographic signature unique to me. I built NovaStream. I built the algorithm. I am the architect. Marcus was simply the face on the billboard. The room erupted. The board members stood up, shouting over one another. "Fraud. You lied to us. We will sue you for everything you are worth." Marcus shrank back, looking small and pathetic against the wall of glass. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Elena, please." I silenced the room with a raised hand. I slid a document across the long table toward him. "You have 2 choices. Marcus," I said, my tone completely devoid of mercy. "Option 1, you go to federal prison for embezzlement, securities fraud, and perjury. The FBI is already building a file." Marcus swallowed hard, his face pale as a sheet. "Option 2, I continued, you resign immediately. You sign over all your personal assets, including your shares, your homes, and your cars, to satisfy the debt to Olympus. You leave this building with nothing but your freedom." You can't do this," he choked out. "I already did," I replied. "Sign the papers, Marcus. Or I make the call to the district attorney right now." Marcus gripped the edge of the obsidian conference table, his knuckles turning white. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning and the terrified breathing of the man who had once called himself a king. He looked around at the board members, his eyes darting frantically, looking for a sympathetic face, but finding only stone-cold judgment. You are making a mistake," Marcus stammered, his voice rising in pitch. "I am the face of NovaStream. I am the brand. If you remove me, the stock will tank. The public buys into me, not just the software. I can't be replaced." I leaned back in my leather chair, crossing my legs slowly. I looked at him as one might look at a bug trapped under a glass. "Marcus," I said, my voice smooth and dangerously quiet, "you are confused about how capitalism works. The market does not care about the face on the billboard if the product inside the box is broken. The product is my code. You are just the packaging. And honestly, you are expired. Serafina, who had been shrinking into her chair, suddenly sat up straight. She adjusted her sunglasses, trying to summon the arrogance she had displayed at the party. That is not fair, she cried out, her voice shrill. Marcus has been under so much pressure. He deserves a second chance. You are just trying to ruin him because you are jealous I did not even look at her. I simply slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward the board members. This is the corporate credit card statement for the last month. I announced calmly. Please note the transaction dated 3 days ago, $12,000 at Hermes, listed as server maintenance equipment. I was unaware that a limited edition Birkin bag improved our bandwidth. Serafina's face turned a shade of pale usually reserved for corpses. She slumped back, silencing herself effectively. Marcus, seeing his defenses crumbling, tried to play his last card. He straightened his tie, trying to look dignified. Fine. If you want to play hardball, Elena, go ahead. I will walk. I have my own assets. I have the Malibu property. I will start over and crush you. I laughed. It was a genuine, amused sound. The Malibu villa, I asked, tilting my head. The one you put a down payment on last week using funds you embezzled from the Series B round the bank flagged that transaction as high risk yesterday. They sold the toxic debt immediately. I bought the note this morning. I own the mortgage. Marcus. And I am foreclosing. The blood drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had no company, no money, no home, and no reputation. The facade of the powerful CEO evaporated, leaving behind a terrified child. Slowly, painfully, Marcus slid out of his chair. He did not stand tall. He fell to his knees on the plush carpet. The board members looked away, uncomfortable with the display of raw desperation. He crawled toward me, reaching for the hem of my pants, but I pulled my leg away. Elena. Baby, please, he sobbed, tears streaming down his face, ruining his expensive shirt. We have been together for 5 years. 5 years. Doesn't that mean anything? You can't do this to me. I love you. I stared down at him, my expression unmoving. He saw the lack of mercy in my eyes and panicked. He scrambled to find a scapegoat. He turned his head and pointed a shaking finger at Serafina. It was her. Marcus shrieked, his voice cracking. She made me do it. Elena. She seduced me. She told me to take the money. I was weak, but she is a witch. She is a gold digger. I love only you. The room went deadly silent. Serafina stood up, her entire body trembling with rage. You lying coward, Serafina screamed. She lunged at him. Before anyone could react, she was on top of him, her manicured nails raking across his face. Marcus howled in pain as she scratched his cheek, drawing blood. They rolled on the floor of the boardroom, a tangle of limbs and cursing, destroying the last shred of dignity either of them possessed. Get off me, Marcus yelled, trying to push her away. I will kill you, she screeched. I watched the chaos with a detached sense of pity. It was grotesque. It was pathetic. Is this the leadership you want for your company? I asked the board members, gesturing to the brawling couple on the floor. This is his true class level. I nodded to the security guards standing by the door. Get her out of here. 2 burly guards stepped forward, peeling a screaming Serafina off of Marcus and dragging her out the double doors. Her curses echoed down the hallway until the heavy doors clicked shut. Marcus lay on the floor, panting, bleeding from a scratch on his cheek, his hair a mess. He looked up at me, waiting for me to help him up. I did not move. Sit in the chair. Marcus, I commanded. He crawled back to his seat, shaking uncontrollably. I pushed the resignation papers and the asset forfeiture agreement toward him. I placed a heavy fountain pen on top of the documents. "Sign it," I said. "Or the police come in next." Marcus picked up the pen. His hand shook so violently that the tip of the pen tapped a rhythmic beat against the paper. He looked at the document, realizing that with a few strokes of ink, he was signing away his life. He was returning to zero. "Please," he whispered one last time, a breath of air escaping his lungs. "Sign," I repeated. He lowered the pen and began to write. The scratch of the pen against the paper sounded like a coffin lid sliding shut. Marcus stared at his signature, the ink still wet on the heavy bond paper. He had just signed away his shares, his savings, and his dignity. The personal fines for the SEC violations would eat up whatever crumbs were left in his accounts. He was not just broke, he was drowning in a sea of debt that would take 3 lifetimes to repay. I picked up the papers and tapped them on the table to align the edges. "The board has appointed me as interim CEO effective immediately," I announced to the silent room. "My first act is restructuring the executive leadership." I turned to Marcus, who was staring at his hands as if they belonged to a stranger. "You are terminated for cause, Mr. Vance," I said, my voice echoing in the large room. "Hand over your badge and your company phone. Security will escort you to your desk to collect personal items only. You have 10 minutes." He fumbled for his badge, his hands shaking so hard he dropped it twice before placing it on the obsidian table. It looked small and insignificant there. I watched on the security monitors as the guards marched him down the long glass corridor. A week ago, this walk was a parade. Employees would bow their heads, hoping for a nod from the great genius. Now, the open plan office was a gauntlet of judgment. The engineers stopped typing. The marketing team lowered their voices. I saw the whispers ripple through the room like a virus. They were not looking at a leader anymore. They were looking at a fraud. Marcus stopped for a second, catching his reflection in a glass pane. I imagined the memory hitting him then. The party. The champagne. My question. Really, he finally understood that it was not a question of disbelief. It was a warning. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. He reached the lobby, clutching a cardboard box containing a framed photo of himself and a stress ball. Serafina was standing by the revolving doors, frantically typing on her phone, waiting for a ride. She looked up and saw him. "Serafina." He started, stepping toward her, his voice weak. I don't know what to do." She recoiled as if he were contagious. Her face twisted into a mask of pure disgust. "Get away from me," she screamed, drawing the attention of the receptionist. You loser. You said you were rich. You said you owned everything. Now look at you. A broke, pathetic liar. Don't you ever call me again." She spat on the floor near his Italian leather shoes and stormed out into a waiting yellow cab without looking back. Marcus pulled out his personal cell phone, the only thing he had left. He started dialing. I could guess who he was calling: his golf buddies, his hedge fund friends, the people who drank his scotch and laughed at his jokes about his boring wife. He held the phone to his ear, paced a few steps, then lowered it. Voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. The news of the SEC investigation and the intellectual property theft was already trending on social media. In the world of high finance, failure is a contagious disease, and Marcus was patient zero. No one was coming to save him. He took a subway back to our penthouse. He likely thought he could beg, or maybe he just had nowhere else to go. He walked up to the heavy front door and pressed his thumb against the biometric scanner. Access denied. I had reset the encryption keys the moment the ink dried on his resignation letter. He tried the keypad. Nothing. He pounded on the door, but the sound was swallowed by the heavy insulation. The sky turned gray, matching the concrete of the city. A slow, cold rain began to fall. It soaked his ruined suit, plastering his hair to his forehead. He slid down the wall and sat on the wet stoop, his box of office junk beside him. He looked like a ghost of the man who had toasted to his own greatness just 7 days ago. A sleek black limousine pulled up to the curb, its tires hissing on the wet asphalt. The back window rolled down with a smooth electric hum. I looked out at him from the warmth of the leather interior. Marcus scrambled toward the limousine, slipping on the wet pavement, his eyes wide with a delusional hope. He clawed at the door handle, pulling it frantically, believing that this was his rescue, that I had come to my senses and returned to save him from the consequences of his own actions. "Elena, Elena." "Open the door," Marcus shouted, his face pressed against the tinted glass. "I knew it. I knew you wouldn't leave me like this." I did not unlock the door. Instead, I pressed a button on the armrest, lowering the window just 3 inches. The cold, damp air of the city rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and his desperation. I looked at him, not with anger, but with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen in a jar. "Elena, oh God, thank you," he sobbed, gripping the top of the window glass with wet, shaking fingers. "Let me in. It is cold. I made a mistake. A huge mistake. I will fix it. I will do anything. Anything I asked, my voice flat. Yes, yes, anything." He nodded rapidly, water dripping from his nose. "I will work for you. I will be an intern. I will sweep the floors of the server room. Just, please, don't leave me out here with nothing. I can't survive out here. I need the life we had." I reached into my bag and pulled out a plain white envelope. I slid it through the narrow gap in the window. Marcus grabbed it with trembling hands, tearing it open. He likely expected a check, or perhaps the keys to a safe house. Instead, he pulled out a boarding pass. "What? What is this?" he stammered, squinting at the paper in the dim streetlights. "It is a one-way ticket," I explained calmly. "It departs in 4 hours." He read the destination, and his face crumbled. It was not a ticket to Paris or Milan. It was a ticket to a small, rusting industrial town in the Midwest, the place he had been born, the place he had spent the last decade lying about, pretending he was the son of a diplomat rather than the son of a shift worker. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No, I can't go back there. I am Marcus Vance. I am a tech visionary. I can't go back to that. That hole. This is where you start. Marcus," I said, "you always told the press you were a self-made genius. You loved the narrative of the lone wolf. Well, here is your chance. Go prove it. Build an empire again. But this time, do it without my code and without my money." He looked at the ticket, then back at me, terror filling his eyes. He realized that the mask was gone. He was no longer the prodigy. He was just a boy from a dying town who had gotten lucky once. You are ruining my life," he choked out. "I am correcting it." I replied, "Do you remember what you said to me at the party? You said you could dump me anytime you wanted. You thought you were the one holding the power." I leaned closer to the gap in the window, ensuring he heard every syllable. "You forgot the physics of our relationship. Marcus, the person standing on solid ground is the only one who can drop someone. You were never on the ground. You were climbing a rope, and I was the one holding the other end. All I did was let go." He stared at me, his mouth open, the rain soaking his collar. "I have done one last thing for you," I added, signaling the driver to start the engine. "I kept your old car, the beat-up sedan you drove when we first met. It is parked in the public lot on 4th Street. It has a boot on the wheel because of unpaid parking tickets, but I am sure a genius like you can figure that out." The realization washed over him. I wasn't killing him. I wasn't suing him into oblivion. I was doing something far worse. I was erasing the last 5 years of his existence. I was putting him back exactly where I found him, as if he had never mattered at all. Elena. No. Don't do this, I pressed the button. The window rolled up with a smooth, final hum, sealing me back into the quiet luxury of the car. I tapped the partition. Drive, I said. The limousine pulled away from the curb, splashing through the puddles. I did not look back, but I could hear his voice, a faint, muffled scream fading into the rhythm of the falling rain. 30 days had passed since the rain washed away the last remnants of my marriage. I stood backstage at the Global Innovation Summit in San Francisco, the very stage Marcus had obsessed over for 5 years. He used to practice speeches in front of the mirror, imagining the applause he would never earn. Today, the applause was real, but it was not for him. Please welcome the woman who single-handedly redefined cybersecurity architecture. The announcer's voice boomed through the auditorium. The CEO of the newly rebranded Phoenix Systems and the most influential figure in Silicon Valley, Elena Vance. I walked into the blinding white spotlight. I wore a crimson suit that commanded attention, a stark contrast to the beige shadows I used to inhabit. The clapping was deafening. I looked out at the sea of faces, 3,000 industry leaders, investors, and journalists in the front row. I spotted the same people who had smirked at me during the party at the Plaza, the bankers who had ignored my handshakes, the socialites who had whispered behind their fans. They were not smirking now. They looked at me with a mixture of reverence and terrifying respect. I leaned into the microphone. For a long time, we believed that the value of a company was defined by the loudness of its leader. I said, my voice steady and amplified. We were wrong. True value is silent. It is in the code that protects your data while you sleep. It is in the integrity of the architecture. At Phoenix Systems, we do not sell smoke and mirrors. We sell truth. The crowd erupted again. I waited for the noise to die down before delivering the final blow to the past. Success means nothing if it is built on the exploitation of others. I continued. That is why, effective immediately, I am pledging 20% of our annual profits to launch the Second Chance Initiative. This fund will provide legal aid and capital to female entrepreneurs who have been victims of financial abuse. We will make sure no one else has to build an empire in the dark. 2,000 miles away, in a cramped, dusty electronics repair shop in Ohio, the air smelled of burnt solder and stale coffee. Marcus sat on a wobbly stool, wearing a blue polyester uniform with a name tag that hung crookedly on his chest. His hands, once manicured and soft, were now stained with grease and covered in tiny cuts. "Hey, Marcus," his manager bellowed from the front counter, a large man with no patience. "Stop daydreaming that microwave isn't going to fix itself. I need it done in 10 minutes or you are docked an hour of pay. I am working on it, sir," Marcus stammered, picking up a screwdriver with aching fingers. Above the counter, a small television set buzzed with static. The news channel was broadcasting the highlights of the summit. Marcus looked up, his eyes locking onto the screen. He saw me standing tall, bathed in light, looking more beautiful and powerful than he had ever seen me. He heard my voice cut through the tinny speakers of the TV. "Remember this," I said to the world. "No one can set your value, except you." Marcus stared at the screen, his throat tight. He looked around the dingy shop, at the broken toasters and the cracked phone screens. The delusion finally shattered. He realized, with a crushing weight, that he had never been the genius. He had never been the golden boy. He was just an ordinary man who had been incredibly lucky to have a brilliant woman love him, and he had been foolish enough to throw her away. He reached up and turned off the TV, the screen fading to black. He picked up the screwdriver and went back to work, his head bowed in permanent defeat. Back in New York, I returned to my apartment. It was quiet, but it was no longer the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of peace. I poured a glass of vintage red wine and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights of Manhattan sprawled out beneath me like a carpet of diamonds. I was tired, but I felt lighter than I had in a decade. I raised the glass to my reflection in the window. I did not smile the cold, sharp smile of revenge. That part of me was finished. Instead, a warm, genuine smile spread across my face. The war was over. The debris was cleared. I took a sip of wine and turned away from the window, stepping out of the shadows and walking into the light of my new life. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and let's chat. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people.